So the 5600G and 5700G currently have the best integrated graphics you can get on a desktop CPU. And in this video, we're going to run through the 5600G through a few games and see what kind of performance you can expect. This should give you an idea of what games you'll be able to play and which ones will be unplayable. From what I've researched, the 5600G is comparable to around the NVIDIA 1030. Now, before we move on, if you find this video informative, I'd appreciate it if you subscribed and liked the video. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. And I'll also post my system specs and timestamps in the description. The 5600G and 5700G are unique in the Ryzen 5000 series of CPUs, as they're the only desktop CPUs with integrated graphics. The 5600G is a 6-core, 12-thread CPU that can boost up to 4.4 GHz. And a few things to know about the 5600G, 5700G, and 5500 is that they're based on AMD's mobile CPUs. Therefore, they have half the cache compared to the 5600 and 5600X. It would be sitting around 16 megabytes, whereas the 5600X has 32 megabytes. As well, they only support up to PCIe 3.0 versus 4.0 for 5600X and the rest of the AMD lineup. When it comes to the integrated graphics, the 5600G has 7 cores, and the 5700G has 8 cores and a slightly higher clock speed. Since the CPU and integrated graphics will share the system RAM, use at least 16 gigabytes, and preferably the fastest that you can get, something like a 3200 CL14 or a 3600 CL16. Because RAM can easily bottleneck the integrated graphics performance because it's not as fast as what a dedicated graphics card has. If you don't plan on using the integrated graphics, I do not suggest getting one of these CPUs. Rather go with the 5600 or 5600X for roughly the same price. If you are looking for a cheap way to get into PC gaming, you can always pick this up and then save up for a dedicated graphics and use that later. This CPU is very capable, and it can pair well with something like a 6600 or 6600 XT. Now let's get into some benchmarks. Here we are playing Valorant, starting off 1080p, medium settings. I was getting anywhere from 73 up to 104 FPS, so this game is very playable. With the fairly high FPS on medium settings, I'm going to update the graphics to high and see what kind of performance we're going to get here.
Your first learning.
Now, playing a few games of this, what I've seen is that you're going to get between low 60s and high 70s for performance, which again is still really good for this type of game. Moving on to Overwatch 2, again 1080p, medium settings. Starting off with medium, we're seeing quite a bit lower than what we were getting in Valorant. We're averaging around the 40 FPS mark, which again isn't too bad, but with a first-person shooter type game, it's not the best to be that low. So we're going to go and turn the settings down a little bit to low and see what kind of FPS we get. Okay, after changing the settings to low and going through and playing a few games here, the performance is much better. We're seeing quite a huge jump. It's now gone up to low 70s to about 100 FPS on average. So at low, this game is very playable on the GPU, or integrated GPU. Here we are in Fortnite, starting off 1080p medium settings. This was not playable at all. It was hovering around the mid-30s and would spike up to mid-40s, but there's absolutely nothing going on. I felt that it wasn't worth going any further with this because it's unplayable at this point right now. So we're going to go in and change the settings down to low. After knocking down the presets to low, the game got much more playable. We're sitting here with some action sequences going on, and we're anywhere between the mid-40s to the mid-50s, which is much more playable than what I've seen before. And the graphics look like crap, but you can get by playing this game at these settings with this iGPU. Now we're moving on to Grand Theft Auto 5, 1080p normal settings, and the game is still playable at these settings. You're going to get around the low 30s to low 40s, which in this type of game isn't too bad. You might notice during the actual gameplay where this is just the benchmark, those could probably dip down a little bit more. But overall, still pretty good. To get an even somewhat playable FPS on Shadow of the Tomb Raider, I had to drop the resolution down to 720p, and I had to drop the graphic settings down to low. And when I did that, the resolution scale on OBS screwed up on me, so I ended up with a smaller piece being recorded. But overall, in the end, I got an average FPS of 33, which, again, for a non-first-person shooter is still very playable. So we're looking at 4 to 5 year old games where this GPU, iGPU, can still play. So moving on to Ghost Recon Breakpoint, which is also the newest game on this list, this iGPU is definitely starting to show its limitations. So I dialed the resolution down to 990p, very low settings, and we ended up getting an FPS of 26, average FPS of 26. So this is where you're kind of reaching the limits of what this iGPU can handle.